In the fall of 1967, the American ambassador to Turkey walked unannounced into the office of Prime Minister Süleyman Demirel. Before he even sat down, the ambassador demanded an answer to a single accusatory question. "Are you changing axis?" It was a severe accusation. Washington had spent decades molding Turkey into the ultimate, uncompromising outpost of the Western alliance, expected to guard NATO's eastern flank against communism without question. But behind closed doors, Ankara was doing the unthinkable. Turkish officials were actively negotiating massive economic deals with the Soviet Union, welcoming Russian engineers, and securing millions in heavy industry loans from Moscow. The Soviet Union served as the singular compass guiding every major Turkish foreign policy maneuver. Turkish alignment with the West relied on a highly calculated, pragmatic game of survival, where loyalty to Washington was negotiated minute by minute. During the interwar period, Turkey maintained an autonomous, friendly balancing act with Moscow, securing early industrial credits from the Soviets in the 1930s without committing to a formal military bloc. This map illustrates the geopolitical vice that shattered that autonomy at the end of World War II. In 1945, Joseph Stalin issued an ultimatum, demanding joint military control over the western Bosphorus Straits and territorial concessions in the eastern province of Kars. The geopolitical panic was immediate. Turkish leaders realized their pre-war independence was a death sentence, with the Red Army closing in on the capital from two directions. Ankara frantically pivoted to Washington to secure its borders. Turkey committed its military to NATO and opened its economy to massive influxes of American dollars, including millions in Marshall aid. Stalin's aggression inadvertently engineered the modern Turkish state, forcing Ankara to embed fierce anti-communism into the highest levels of its bureaucracy and military identity. The cracks in this ironclad alliance began to show in 1962. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States secretly agreed to pull its nuclear-armed Jupiter missiles out of Turkey, leaving Ankara completely out of the negotiation. Years later, as ethnic violence erupted on the island of Cyprus, Washington went a step further, imposing devastating arms embargoes on the Turkish military to prevent them from intervening. Turkish leaders realized they had grown dangerously reliant on a Western bloc that routinely dismissed their national interests. Western economic planners advised Turkey to stick to agriculture and light manufacturing. The Soviet Union stepped into the void, offering massive, long-term credits specifically designed to build heavy Turkish industry. Taking advantage of the global easing of Cold War tensions, known as détente, Turkey accepted Soviet money to build steel and aluminum factories, even as it continued to violently suppress domestic leftist movements at home. By visibly engaging with Moscow, Ankara broadcast a clear signal to the West that it possessed alternative economic and diplomatic lifelines. Turkey successfully converted its greatest existential threat into a diplomatic lever, forcing Washington to realize that Ankara was an independent actor whose loyalty had to be continuously earned. In 1979, the Soviet Army invaded Afghanistan. The terrifying proximity of Russian troops pushed Turkey back into a tight security embrace with the United States. Washington designated Turkey as the anchor of its Green Belt strategy, a moderate, secular military power meant to hold the line against Soviet expansion and the radicalism spilling out of the Iranian Revolution. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Turkish politicians initially celebrated the dissolution, envisioning themselves as the natural leaders of a newly liberated bloc of Central Asian Turkic republics. This chart tracks Turkey's perceived strategic value to the Western alliance. Notice the line plummeting instantly the moment the Soviet Union disappears. For a half-century, Turkey had extracted concessions from Washington almost entirely because of the communist threat next door. The erasure of the USSR evaporated Turkey's primary diplomatic leverage, leaving Ankara scrambling to redefine its strategic relevance in a destabilized Middle East. For 50 years, Turkey's global strategy was tethered to the Soviet Union. It was the threat that forced Ankara to seek Western protection, and the leverage that allowed them to set the price for it.